Bruce McArthur seemed like a regular guy. He was a grandpa, he worked as a gardener, he was a familiar face in his Toronto neighborhood. But underneath this normal appearance was a scary secret. McArthur lived a double life, a respected member of society during the day, a cruel killer at night. McArthur's crimes shocked everyone in Canada and other countries. How could someone who seemed so normal do such terrible things? This question bothered investigators and the public. The search for answers led deep into the mind of a killer, showing a twisted mind filled with darkness. The investigation into McArthur's crimes showed a pattern of violence. His victims, all men from Toronto's gay village, were murdered efficiently. The discovery of their bodies, hidden in planters on a property McArthur could access, showed how he operated. The case of Bruce McArthur reminded everyone that evil can hide in unexpected places. It forced society to face the fact that bad people don't always look like monsters. They can be our neighbors, people we know, the friendly face we see on the street. In 2003, Bruce McArthur was in court for attacking someone with a metal pipe. This incident, though worrisome, resulted in a sentence that allowed him to remain free with certain conditions. As part of this, McArthur had a psychological test. The results of this test would later become a scary point of discussion. The psychologist said McArthur was not likely to be violent. The report described him as passive, someone who didn't like anger or arguments. The report did mention that McArthur was sometimes too cooperative, suggesting he might be hiding rebellious feelings. However, this assessment was completely wrong. It failed to see the darkness hidden beneath McArthur's seemingly harmless exterior. The report's conclusion was the opposite of the terrible crimes McArthur would later commit. The 2003 assessment shows us that psychological testing has limits. It's hard to predict how people will behave, especially when they're hiding something. The report, meant to assess risk, gave a false sense of security that had deadly consequences. Bruce McArthur created a fake personality. To people who knew him casually, he was friendly. He was a grandpa, a gardener, a man who seemed to fit in perfectly with everyday life. This fake image helped McArthur go unnoticed for years. But beneath this normal appearance was a very disturbed person. McArthur had a dark side, fueled by violent thoughts and a need to control others. His outward behavior was very different from the cruel urges that made him commit such awful acts. Experts think McArthur wanted to seem harmless on purpose. By acting passive and non-confrontational, he could trick potential victims and avoid suspicion. This careful deception allowed him to move freely in his community, all while committing his horrible crimes. The difference between McArthur's public image and his true nature is a scary example of how two-faced people can be. It shows the danger of judging people based on how they look, and reminds us that evil can hide behind a friendly face. Experts call Bruce McArthur a hedonistic serial killer. This tells us about why he did these awful things. It shows us a man driven by a sick desire for pleasure and control. For McArthur, violence and sexual pleasure were connected. Hedonistic killers often enjoy the act of killing itself. They might have rituals, making their victims suffer longer to increase their own twisted enjoyment. McArthur posed his victims' bodies and kept trophies, showing he wanted to control them even after death. McArthur started killing later in life, which raises questions. Was this a sudden change, or had he been hiding these urges for years? The possibility of earlier undiscovered crimes makes McArthur's psychology even more complicated. Understanding what motivates a hedonistic killer like McArthur is disturbing but important for investigating such crimes. By understanding the twisted desires that drive these people, law enforcement can better understand their behavior and try to prevent future tragedies. Section 5. A Double Life. Navigating Toronto's Gay Village. Bruce McArthur was a familiar face in Toronto's gay village. He went to the bars and clubs there and had casual relationships with men. This part of McArthur's life was very different from the image he showed everyone else. That of a family man, a grandfather, a seemingly good person. Even though he was openly gay in the gay village, McArthur hid this outside of that area. He went to church regularly and acted like a respectable member of the community. This big difference between his two lives shows how much he tried to hide who he really was. McArthur's activities in the gay village weren't just social, they were connected to his crimes. He used his presence there to target vulnerable men, taking advantage of their trust to trick them. The case of Bruce McArthur reminds us that looks can be deceiving. It shows how important it is to be careful, especially in communities where trust is important. Being able to recognize and report suspicious behavior can prevent tragedies and keep vulnerable people safe. Section 6. The gruesome reality. McArthur's methods and rituals. The details of Bruce McArthur's crimes are very disturbing. He often tied up his victims and hurt them terribly before killing them. The brutality of his methods shocked even experienced investigators, showing how evil he was. After the murders, McArthur did chilling things with the bodies. He posed them, often in revealing positions, and took pictures as sick souvenirs. These acts were more than just killing. They showed a psychological need for control and power. McArthur also kept trophies from his victims, like hair and jewelry. These items, found in his apartment, were scary reminders of his crimes and gave more clues about his twisted mind. Killers often keep trophies to stay connected to their victims and relive the power they felt during the murders. The gruesome nature of McArthur's crimes and his rituals after death show a deeply disturbed person. His planning and deliberate actions reveal a cold, calculating killer who enjoyed the suffering of his victims. Section 7. Unmasking a monster, the police investigation and arrest. The investigation into Bruce McArthur's crimes was long and complicated. It took several years and involved many law enforcement agencies working hard to put the pieces together and catch the killer. The case started with missing person reports from Toronto's gay village. But as the investigation continued, the terrible truth started to come out. A big break in the case came when Andrew Kinsman disappeared. Kinsman, unlike some of McArthur's other victims, was not an outcast. His disappearance was a big warning sign and led to a more serious investigation. Security camera footage showed McArthur and Kinsman together on the day Kinsman disappeared. This important evidence allowed police to get a search warrant for McArthur's apartment. Inside, they found a lot of evidence, including the tools used in the murders and computer files with pictures of the victims. The arrest of Bruce McArthur stopped his reign of terror, but it also raised questions about how he avoided being caught for so long. The investigation showed problems within law enforcement and highlighted the need for greater care and awareness when working with marginalized communities. Section 8. The making of a monster, psychological factors and trauma. We can't know exactly why Bruce McArthur became a serial killer, but several things probably played a part. Experts believe that a mix of psychological issues, personal experiences, and social influences shaped his path to becoming a murderer. McArthur hid his homosexuality, especially when he was younger, which probably made him feel ashamed and inadequate. These internal conflicts, along with possible childhood trauma, may have created a buildup of anger and resentment. The deaths of his parents when he was in his late 20s, a big loss for anyone, could have further damaged McArthur's already fragile mental state. Grief, if not dealt with healthily, can become destructive, possibly making pre-existing psychological problems worse. It's important to remember that while these factors may give us some insight into McArthur's mind, they don't excuse his actions. Understanding the beginning of his violence doesn't make his crimes any less serious or lessen the devastating impact they had on the victims and their families. Section 9. Justice delayed, systemic issues, and missed opportunities. The case of Bruce McArthur showed uncomfortable truths about biases within the justice system. Many of his victims were marginalized, men who were often ignored or dismissed by society, which raises concerns about whether their disappearances were taken seriously at first. Some people argue that McArthur avoided being caught for so long partly because of how he looked and his ability to blend in with seemingly respectable people. This case shows the dangers of judging people based on stereotypes and the need for law enforcement to address hidden biases that might affect investigations. The McArthur case reminds us that delayed justice is often denied justice. It shows how important it is to hold law enforcement accountable, support marginalized communities, and work towards a fairer society where everyone's disappearance is treated with the urgency and respect it deserves. Bruce McArthur's legacy is a dark one, but it also serves as a call to action. By learning from past mistakes and addressing systemic issues within the justice system, we can try to create a safer and more just society for everyone.